hearing there was no breakthrough on Brexit. But what's the state of play in Brussels right now?
Absolutely. Well, this was a pretty uneventful summit. There was no major breakthrough, as you said. There was no major incident. As you know, the EU leaders started talking about Brexit on Wednesday evening, and the discussion was really short. Essentially, the EU 27 said that they renewed their confidence in Michel Barnier, that he was the one in charge of the discussions with London, and that it was too early at this stage to call for another summit on Brexit in November to potentially sign this withdrawal agreement. But of course, the discussions on Brexit continued yesterday in the corridors and in the bilateral meetings. The mood was much better than at the Salzburg meeting. I think there's a appreciation here in Brussels and in the different capitals of Europe for the very difficult situation that Theresa May is in. Mark Rutte, the Prime Minister of the Netherlands, even called her a formidable politician, but they made no progress on solving this backstop issue and the border between Ireland and Northern Ireland. There is continued talks about potentially extending the backstop not just to Northern Ireland but to the rest of the United Kingdom. But we'll have to wait and see what that will give. On the EU side, there's really this feeling that as much as the technical side of the discussions, well, they went as far as they could, and really now it's a matter of politics. The ball is in the court of London, as President Emmanuel Macron just said, and other EU leaders shared that assessment. They will really depend on the policies that will be decided in London, and whether Theresa May can sell this deal amongst her in her own camp and in Westminster. And there was indeed this discussion about extending the transition period beyond 2020. But to be honest, this doesn't solve the issue of the backstop. And it was really a way of showing that there was goodwill on the table, that they were making progress, but the fundamental issues remain on the table.
Well, Brian, let's look at another very big issue for the EU, and that's migration. And that was also discussed at this summit. What headway was made there?
Well, if you remember when there was the last summit in June, it was all about migration, and there were some discussions about these disembarkation platforms, about the control centers. Now, this time, migration seemed much less of a controversial subject, and the conclusions from the summit were very timid. They only said that they wanted to continue reinforcing the external borders and continue cooperation with third countries in order to block migrants and asylum seekers before they reach Europe. And there are talks currently going on with Morocco, with Egypt, which has already raised eyebrows by several human rights groups who are concerned about the human rights record, about the Al-Sisi regime. But as I said, there was no mention of these disembarkation platforms, which are these platforms that would be set up in third countries in order to keep the migrants before they come. I spoke to a senior EU official, and he was very uncomfortable with this discussion, saying that the EU in no set up in these countries, but they weren't able to really define what a disembarkation platform was and what a camp was. So clearly there's still some discussions going on this. But the most controversial, the most divisive issue for Europeans is really what to do with the asylum seekers who are already in Europe. Now, there's been no progress on this. There is some discussions to potentially shift the responsibility amongst EU countries, not by receiving asylum seekers, but by pledging more money, for example, for external security. And but of course, this wasn't in the conclusions, and that will continue being discussed in the next few weeks.